Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Neeraj Mathrani. My guest today is Eric Garvey. He's a senior HR leader with more than 10 years of experience. Today, we're going to talk about all things promotions. The goal is to help you get your next promotion and that higher income. You'll hear of various strategies and practical tips that you can implement right away. You'll also hear the insider perspective from the HR side and from the people manager side. So you know the rules of the game, so to speak, to help you secure your next promotion. Let's get started. Welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So we're going to jump right into it. Based on your experience, what is one thing that someone must do to get a promotion? Let's start with the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think the first thing is just simply talking about it with your manager. And of course, there's some complexities that go into how do you actually broker that conversation, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I think it really just starts with initiating the conversation. You really don't get what you don't ask for, and so we need to at least put ourselves out there, as an employee. And if it is something that we want to go after, if we want to get promoted into that next role, we need to kind of put people on alert and let them know that we're open to that opportunity and we're actively looking for it.
Yeah. In your experience, what factors are taken into account by senior leaders when considering someone for a promotion?
Taking a second to really diagnose what is the job that we're asking somebody to do. How are they meeting those expectations? And so when we think about expectations for any position, it's not only what you achieve in that role, what's the impact that you're having for the company, but how do you go about doing that? And that gets into a little bit of like the cultural aspect, the values. What does the company reward and care about? Some company cultures reward high collaboration. So people that are effectively working across different departments. I don't know any companies that really don't care about collaboration, but I think there is an element of, being able to suss out what are those cultural values that we care about and uphold. So really ask yourself, on the value side, on the company side of things, how do I go about doing my job? Am I a great person to work with? What would make me an even better person to work with? Am I easy to work with? Do I work hard? And then, so that's kind of on the how side of things, but going back to the what. If I were the big boss of the company, what things would demonstrate the most impact? As much as we don't like comparing ourselves with other people, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable, but to brag about yourself, you do need to self-evaluate and identify like what makes me stand out amongst the crowd in terms of impact and how I go about doing my work.
One other thing that I would add in there is budget also plays a big role, which is a constraint. So in some cases, you might be delivering awesome impact and you're doing it based on cultural values, but there may not be budget, especially in this time of a low economic downturn.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very practical point, right? Is the financials of the company, the financial health of the company. So regardless of company size or industry, I think there's this macro level environment question of how is the business doing overall? How much money do we have to spend and allocate on promotions? And the other reality too beyond budget is just timing. Sometimes the company needs to be a little bit tighter on cash, to your point about economic downturn, but timing might not be right because the business doesn't need that promoted person. So let's pretend for a second that you are a entry level manager and you are looking to eventually become like a director level or head of or something like that. Taking a step back, does your company need that higher level position right now? It might in 6 months when the business makes sense because of growth. Maybe there's a new department that's forming, a new team that's forming, and it makes a lot more sense to promote somebody into that role. Your company just might not need that higher level position quite yet.
Yeah. So you mentioned about raising it with your manager. How can people go about actually doing that?
In the past, something that I've even done for myself is just written down, what are my career goals at this company within this department? Here's the things I care about. Here's some things I'd like to learn and get exposure to. And so, sharing those things, it's essentially my professional development plan, but it sends a very clear signal and opens a door to have that conversation with my manager. If you've created something like that, you actually just made your manager's job a lot easier. And it makes it really difficult for them to dispute the progress and the growth that you've demonstrated. It makes the conversation so much easier. So it doesn't feel so painful. It's like, oh, we've already been talking about my career. So it makes perfect sense to talk about a promotion or a raise, or, hey, these were 3 stretch goals that we threw out there for my own development. I crushed all 3 of them and I feel like I'm ready for that next thing. It's not so great if you just come out of left field and say, hey, I know we haven't really talked about career, but like I want a promotion. So, that feels like a super awkward conversation, not being judgmental. I think sometimes people come in a little too hot and say like, I deserve this much money. I need this pay. I need this promotion by this date. And that generally does not play out well. For the manager, they're in a weird position because they may or may not have the decision-making power and authority to say yes or no. They are also influencing other people within the company that make those decisions. And then separately, a broader impression to leadership might be like, well, there might be a sense of entitlement. Whether or not objectively, you deserve that promotion, you deserve that raise, that's not the question. There's also a little bit of art to that, to back that science, even if you have the data to say, here's why I deserve that promotion or that raise. But just have an open dialogue and understanding like, hey, I'm interested, here are my career goals. And how do I actually make that happen? Or what are some steps that I can take towards making progress towards that goal? And so, I think for those of you that are listening that are managers, it's also important to just check in on those conversations, initiate them yourselves. You don't have to wait for somebody to bring it up, and you don't have to wait for the company to tell you, hey, let's talk about like career development.
I think the worst fear as a manager for me is when someone is like, hey, I'm leaving. And it's like, why? Oh, I was looking for a promotion. Well, we never had that conversation.
Yeah, and it's always just disappointing to me as like the HR person that sometimes has to do the exit interview. So if you're not familiar, an exit interview is something that's conducted by HR to kind of check in as you're departing a company, like what went well, what could have been better, what advice do you have for management, those types of questions and conversation. And it's incredible the amount of responses I'll have from people that express things. And I say, oh, well, did you ever talk to your manager about that? And the answer is no. And I'm like, well, that's a shame. Like whose fault is that really? Is it the person's fault? Is it the manager's fault? Is it the company's fault? I would argue it's a little bit of everybody. It's a shame that there wasn't an opportunity to broker those conversations and help improve the company, but also invest in that person and have them feeling like they're being invested in and actually being invested in.
Related to that, I would say actually seek out help in the sense of if you're not sure how to approach your manager, and each situation is going to be so nuanced here. So I don't want to give generic advice, but your HR partner, someone like Eric, would be awesome to talk to. You can seek out a mentor at the company who actually understands the company and has an idea of how things are working in the company, who's been there a while, who can guide you through that situation. Or you could seek out career coaching. I offer that as well, but you can seek out with anyone who you're comfortable with. How can you come off assertive but not aggressive when asking for a promotion?
So some companies will have a natural cycle that occurs, whether it's quarterly, annually, whatever that might be, to have performance and career conversations. I think we all need to take ownership of our careers, and we are the CEO of our own lives. It's a joke that I will make from time to time, but so as far as initiating those conversations, a lot of it is dependent on what is your rapport with your manager. Some of us have super close relationships, friendships with our managers. We can talk very candidly and open about anything that might be on our mind. Ideally, that is the case for all of us, and for others, that might not be the case. And so you need to understand what is that level of trust and openness. And so let's talk about how do we foster that trust and openness in order to facilitate that confident conversation that we want to have. And so, let's say your company does not have career conversations set up on a quarterly basis. I think it's on you to ask that question or engage and say like, hey boss, hey manager, hey person, I would love at some point to talk about career development and get a sense of, what opportunities might be here, but also just share a little bit more about what my goals are, what my aspirations are for the next couple of years. Depending on your field of work and what you do, those timelines might look a little bit different, but I think there are ways to engage in that conversation. And so once you've kind of put that on your manager's radar, they're alert, they're aware of what's going on. Like, okay, this person wants to bring up these conversations. So now that manager is primed to have that discussion. Some of the bigger companies might have a requirement and need, unfortunately, to have more of like the sponsorship advocacy thing that exists. But even at a smaller company, I think there's an element of like, you want to create an advocate out of your manager. You want them to be like a huge cheerleader. And so how do you create that cheerleader mentality for your manager? Well, it starts with like doing great work, being a great person to work with. And depending on the company, those things might look a little bit different. But assuming that you've checked both of those boxes, like this conversation should actually be pretty easy. Your manager should be happy to engage in that discussion. They should feel like, yes, I want to talk to you about like growth and opportunity and give you those chances. And so, as long as you're doing great work and you're a solid person to work with in terms of personality and collaboration and communication, you shouldn't have to worry about coming across overly confident. Now, if you do worry about that, like, oh, I'm afraid, this conversation might come out of the blue. Well, let's take a step back. Why does it feel like it's coming out of the blue in the first place? Is it maybe I'm not delivering on my deadlines? Maybe I'm not being the best partner, collaborator, person to work with at a peer level. And so if you feel that way, maybe we need to course correct some of those things. Make sure you're doing a really solid job in your current job in the first place. And now next we can engage in that conversation with my manager.
We talked about the manager being like a proponent for you. How do you find people, look for these people who would advocate for you?
If you're trying to get promoted in your department, I think it starts with understanding who the leadership team is that leads your department. What kind of visibility has your work had for different people in those leadership roles? Again, it can feel a little bit odd. It feels a little bit kind of like political, social, whatever.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's not. I mean, you want to get credit for the work that you've demonstrated. I think we'd all love to believe that the world is a meritocracy and people recognize merit and see it, but we're humans. We have our own biases. We have our own blind spots. Sometimes the loudest, the squeakiest wheel gets the grease, so to speak. But it just starts with your manager. Your manager is going to be your number one advocate, the person that can speak closest to your work, can speak about your work, can talk about your attitude at work and what it's like to collaborate with you. And so that person needs to be in your corner. And so, invest in those conversations, have those discussions. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but you got to get a little uncomfortable for something great to happen. And then beyond your manager, I think there's other peer managers. Maybe if you're in a larger department, who are those other managers that you interact with, leadership folks that will be in those talent calibration meetings? Are you on projects actively with those types of people? Who else is seeing and providing visibility to your work? And so actually would love to toss it back to you as well. I would be curious to hear your perspective on how to advocate for people, or what are some things to keep in mind as you're trying to get other peer managers to advocate for you?
Yeah, I need data, right? And I am there with the team every single day. So I have pretty good visibility, I would say. But another good place to give data is a one-on-one conversation. I try to alternate between career and work one-on-ones so they're focused. But during the work one-on-ones, it's like, are there any other updates that the person can provide that I may not have visibility into? Like, here's a crazy challenge that they accomplished to help us deliver this project, or here's an amazing code review that they did to help other engineers out, or they implemented this large change that is now helping out the whole department that I may not be aware of. So giving visibility in one-on-ones outside the day-to-day work, if needed, that's important as well. Another thing that I have learned in my career is, how can I offload work from my manager? What is something really important that the manager is working on for the company, for the users, where I can provide a helping hand? There are two approaches here. One way is someone can ask, hey manager, how can I help you? That again puts more work on the manager sometimes, versus like, hey, I know you're working on this big thing. Can I create a proposal, or can I offer a solution here? And being more proactive there, that can really help out. One other advice that I've given people on my team is, you mentioned like peer managers. Like it could be you seek out one of them as your mentor or a sponsor, ask them for their advice and build that relationship. And in the process, provide them visibility to what you're doing as well. So this way, other managers have visibility into your work. So when I'm in those calibration sessions, now it's me advocating for them. It's the peer manager who can give some input into it. And then maybe it's a stakeholder giving input into it. And if that input is even that, hey, this person doesn't deserve a promotion at this moment, that's really great feedback that then we can work on.
Yeah, and I think raising your hand, right? That's what you alluded to when you're speaking with your manager. Even for myself, I think back on my career, and there have been a lot of times where I've asked the question of like, how can I help you, manager? How can I make life easier for you, right? I think some of the best people that we've all worked with have been those folks that go above and beyond in terms of extending a helping hand on a project or just going out of their way to help the team. for all of us, we should try to think about how can we optimize our work? How can we have broader impact on the most, the biggest parts of the business or biggest parts of the teams that are delivering for the business, whatever that looks like. We should all be thinking about that way. And it's not always clear what that exactly means, but I think have that conversation with your manager, see where you can help your manager out with any new projects or other things that are maybe keeping them up at night. And
Yeah.
that will definitely, earn that trust and put you on somebody's radar for, being ready for promotion or for that next phase of work.
Yeah. You said it's important to have your manager in your corner, so to speak. But what if even like you're delivering high impact, others see that too, you're getting that feedback, but your manager doesn't seem to be bought in? What can you do there?
Yeah, I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation. Let's just be real.
Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable one because you, as the employee, feel like my manager's not in my corner. They're not advocating for me. So what's going on? What's up? And so I think it starts with that conversation directly with your manager, just understanding. Maybe it's I get a sense that you're not supporting this idea of me being ready for that next level. Can you help me understand that? Is there feedback that you have for me on how I can improve, or do you have any recent examples? And so a little bit is like tossing softball questions, so to get the conversation going. But ultimately, you want to build a level of trust and rapport that your manager can be very direct with you about what's preventing any of those opportunities. And so there can be a million different reasons for it, right? Sometimes managers are, they're human too, right? Like they might not want to shatter your hopes and dreams and say like, listen, we just don't have budget and the timing's not right. Maybe they're afraid to say that to you because of how you react. They might be afraid like, oh, this person's going to blow up and say, I'm out of here. I'm quitting. I'm going to go find a job elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so, you gotta kind of understand the other side of the table, so to speak. And try to empathize with that point of view. But I really do think it just starts with understanding what is the apprehension, like what's driving that? Is there anything that I can do to improve? Because you need to be open to the feedback too of maybe you aren't performing at that next level. Maybe you truly aren't ready for it. And that can be a tough pill to swallow and hear that feedback. But if your manager truly believes that, you got to work with them on it and partner on how to improve and get their buy-in. So that's like kind of the realistic point of view on how to broker the conversation. But yeah, would be curious what your take is.
Yeah. It's also how we receive that feedback. So if I'm getting defensive every time a manager is saying something, then she's going to stop talking to me about this. And actually hearing her feedback, hearing those gaps in performance is directly what I can work on in this next performance review cycle. Asking, what are your expectations? What would exceeding expectations look like here? Maybe even, again, I would say like asking someone for help here. If you're feeling uncomfortable on how to approach her, if things are not changing over time, over like 6 months, over a year, and the company is in a great financial situation, then I would actually say start looking. And that's the advice I would give from a career coach perspective is get your LinkedIn profile up, see if other recruiters reach out to you, and also do the interviews. And that will also give you feedback. Hey, are you at that level? Is that just one-sided, only your manager thinking that? Or actually other people are also thinking that you're supposed to still be at that level for a little bit till you grow. So that could open up other feedback. Or that might be, yeah, actually you're ready, maybe just not at this organization. Let's go to another place where you may get that opportunity.
Depending on what timeline in your mind is feasible to, be ready for that next level, there might be another organization that says, we think you're ready now. And depending on what your goals are financially, and also in just where you're at in your career and life and all these other things, maybe switching it up might be helpful. And so I can't sit here and prescribe exactly what that timeline looks like. Everybody's situation is completely different, but I think it is fair. If it's been a year plus and you haven't seen much movement, it's just been a lot of lip service, a lot of talking, but no walking from your management team, then maybe it is fair to start looking. I think before you jump ship on any company, you should have a conversation. Maybe it's exploring internally what other departments you might want to work for. Are there transferable skills to take on different projects? Are there other things that could just keep you interested for a while and take on some other stretch assignments in the meantime? Doesn't mean that you can't, start looking on the side or whatever you need to do. But at least you're like, how do I get the most out of this organization for my own learning and my development? That it's just like adding more and more to my resume. And so, I think it's a shame sometimes people leave organizations without exploring other opportunities inside the organization or other projects or other things that will just bolster their resume and make them look even better.
Actually, that's a really good point about, hey, look within the organization because there may be opportunities. It could just be that budget is not there in the current department to get to the next level. I'll share a personal example here. I was working on this team. I was at the manager level and I knew I was ready for the senior manager level. And my manager himself was like, I know you're ready, but we don't have the budget here. So he said, are there any other teams within this company where that senior manager opportunity is available? Go talk to that manager, go through the interviews, and see if you get the senior manager role there. So I interviewed there, actually got the role. I got the offer from the other department. And then my manager used that as leverage with the current department and saying, like, look, this department is providing that opportunity. Can we match it here? And then I actually got the senior manager title in my current department itself. Yeah, looking at other departments, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and I think for bigger companies too, you have to realize like there's competition internally as well. Departments are sometimes fighting for the best talent with each other, which sounds kind of silly because it's like one team, the whole company should have that mindset. But once you just reach a certain number of people inside of an organization, you want to steal from each other's team. And so I think it's just a good reminder that make sure you've exhausted all options internally before you look externally.
Mm-hmm. We talked about if the manager is not bought in. What if the manager is bought in and the senior leadership is not bought in? How can we navigate that situation?
I think that's where you have to work with the manager to understand like what data are they collecting, because sometimes your manager, you want to believe that they're advocating for you, but they might not be asking the right questions. They might not be equipped to advocate, or maybe don't fully understand the process that's in place. And so I think it starts with that conversation, just to understand like what sort of work has been done on their end, like what are they doing. Because I will say from the HR side of things, there have been times where I've worked with managers and I've worked with people that report to those managers, and the manager says, I have somebody on my team that wants to get promoted. They seem pretty upset that they're not getting promoted. And then I start asking questions about the manager. Are they advocating for them to their direct boss or in department meetings? Are they getting them opportunities to take on new projects in other parts of the team so that they're getting exposure to other areas so that people can see their work firsthand? And as I start to ask those questions as the HR business partner, I quickly find out, oh, the manager isn't doing those things. And so I think as an employee, if you might be in that situation, really asking the manager what sorts of things have been done. Now, let's say manager's rock star, checking all these boxes, doing all these things, being the amazing advocate that she is, you still might not, be on the radar of broader leadership. Some departments might have your director of that department or whoever that might be having like department level meetings. There might be an opportunity to have a skip level conversation with, the manager's manager and just understand, hey, I'm curious. I've shared a little bit about my career goals and things like that. I'm just curious, like what stands out to get people promoted here, or what are some signs to you that show and demonstrate that I am ready for that next level. And there's a nuance to bringing that up too, because you don't want that person to be like, wow, that was a pretty bold move, and they're like, need to be promoted or they're going to leave us or something like that. You don't want to leave that impression with that person. At the same time, you want them to know. Again, it's like people don't know what they don't know. And so unless you've spoken out more broadly about here's like what I'm trying to go for and here's how I want to grow and how I want to develop, other people can't advocate for you.
Yeah. Actually, in this case, one other thing I would add is if your manager is an advocate for you, actually your manager can connect you to their manager with the skip level manager, and over time get you connected. And then it's not like you're going behind someone's back or anything like that. It's just like, hey, this is a normal part of the process. This is a great way to give visibility to the manager's manager, and here's the opportunity to do so. Are there any other common mistakes or pitfalls that professionals make when seeking a promotion? What have you seen?
Yeah, I would be curious about your manager take on this, but on the HR side, I will say I've had several people over the course of my career come to me citing Glassdoor or levels.fyi or some site about what the pay should be that they should be receiving. And so I understand the intent of that, but how it comes across is kind of uneducated in terms of awareness. And so what I mean by that is, if you are working at a 50-person startup that is not generating revenue quite yet, and you are coming to me with salary data from Amazon or some other large organization, you are comparing apples to oranges. You truly are. They're very different. Their total rewards programs are going to be different in terms of like base pay, bonus, equity, all the other benefits and perks and things that you can receive. But that's the unrealistic expectation piece is very real, and I don't fault people for that, because I think sometimes we all get in those modes where we're working really hard. We feel like our work should be noticed. It's frustrating. We feel like we deserve a pay raise or whatever that might be. And then the other part of it, kind of related to, is like if you go and ask for a promotion, be careful what you ask for, because if you get it suddenly and you're not ready for it, you've now created a really weird conversation and dynamic for yourself and for the company. Because let's say you're a mid-level, I'll just say a mid-level engineer, and you're screaming from the hilltops that you are a senior engineer, you're ready for it. And now you've been put on those projects. We've given you that title. We've given you that pay. And now you're struggling because you weren't quite ready. You weren't quite ready at, however the company has defined a senior level engineer. And now you're having performance issue. I'm a big fan of somewhere in between, right? How do you work with the manager and work with the employee to figure out how can we get you some exposure to these more elevated responsibilities, get you the growth, get you the development, and then really time box and create a way to say, okay, well, it's been about 3 months. You are killing it at these things. So let's figure out a way to formally get you promoted.
Yeah, good points. So some of the mistakes that I have seen professionals make when seeking a promotion, I'll talk about the mistakes that I've made. Maybe that helps. One is not saying that I want a promotion. What happened was years would pass by and I see people around me getting promoted. So that's definitely one. Another is like finding that fine line between coming off confident versus aggressive. What I've learned is trying to be really mindful of that over time. Is you don't want to bring it up every one-on-one. Hey, where's my promotion? Hey, where's my promotion? On the other side, maybe at once a year might be too little. So maybe do a check-in every 6 months and say, whenever the performance review cycle is, say like, hey, these are my goals. This is where I want to get to. How am I tracking? Do you have any feedback there? Where are the gaps that you see? But again, like you said, a lot of it is building trust before that, making sure you're delivering on results, and then kind of leading into that conversation. And also you've talked about your goals quite a bit, and then kind of having that more explicit conversation around like, hey, I'm looking to get a promotion. What does that look like? Another advice that I heard from someone, which I thought was really good, is figuring out ways to make your manager look good too, where it's like you're performing really well. How can you make your manager look good that they're performing really well too? So keeping that in mind and trying to offload some of the high profile projects and try to help out your manager in that. Any parting advice on how people can set themselves up for getting a promotion or at least a raise?
Because we live in the modern era with all sorts of internet information about jobs and what those jobs look like, job descriptions, access to people via LinkedIn. If you are looking to promote into that next thing, or maybe long term, it's like you want to be a director or VP, or you want to be a principal level engineer, whatever that might be, use the information online to get a sense of like, what are those responsibilities, and start using your network. See who you know in those roles and just ask them to coffee, ask them for a virtual chat. Just get a sense of what their day-to-day life is like. What are the things that were most surprising about taking on that job? What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? And even better, if you can find that type of person inside your current company. So that's more on the promotion side. I think on the like merit increase, salary increase side of things, that really just depends. I mean, if your company already has a regular comp increase cycle, most HR departments will constantly evaluate when they are evaluating merit increases and things like that across the board, or they should be. So when it comes to like other tips for, hey, I would like to see an increase, that's where you have to work with your manager a little bit, and they might be able to give you some more insight. So they might have more visibility to comp ranges and understanding like where you are within that pay band. There might be just some practical realities like you are at the top of your band as well. And so you need to understand that. And maybe your company has said, in order to make more money, you have to get promoted into some other bigger set of work. And so those are just challenges that exist inside organizations. And then, once you've done all your work internally, maybe at some point you say, well, maybe it is time to look externally. And that's okay too.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and giving us the inside perspective from the HR side. Sometimes we don't have full visibility into that. So learning about some of the internal systems really helps there as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really fun to catch up and chat about this stuff.
Awesome. And thank you all for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I post a new episode at least monthly to help you succeed in your career.